1, 2, testing. Testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3. This should be okay. I think it's okay now. Okay, so today is May 9th, 2015. Okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning everybody. Now I think the volume is, can you hear me all right in the back? Okay, we can leave it like this. Okay, so originally, since we missed a couple of classes, I was going to just pass by the rest of Sutta number 129, assuming that the meaning was fairly obvious. But then some people complained and said you should take the rest of Sutta 129. So I changed the announcement yesterday, saying that we'll continue and complete the Sutta. And so we already did, this sutta is called Bālapaṇḍita Sutta, the sutta on the fools and the wise people. And the theme of this sutta, the theme is the different kinds of rebirth that await. Let's say the theme is the suffering that is to be experienced by the foolish person and the happiness that's to be experienced by the wise person. And both suffering and happiness are explained in relation to two existences, in relation to our present existence and in relation to our future existences, to our rebirth. Okay, and so the fool, who is defined as the person who thinks unwholesome thoughts, does unwholesome deeds, and speaks bad words, the fool experiences pain and suffering here and now in this present life, and then he undergoes a bad rebirth. And the sutta gives a somewhat detailed description of the misery of a rebirth in hell, and then it gives an overview of the types of animal rebirth that might await the foolish person. And it's a little bit of a puzzle. Usually the texts speak about the three bad destinations: the hell realms, the animal realm, and the realm of the pretas, the afflicted spirits. But the sutta doesn't mention the pretas, the afflicted spirits, but just speaks about rebirth in hell or the animal realm. And there are also a few other suttas in which the Buddha speaks about somebody who is doing bad deeds. And he says, if this person continues along this track, there are two possible destinations awaiting him, either hell or the animal realm. And so maybe some scholars might then speculate that originally the Buddha didn't teach about the Preta realm, but that was a later addition. But there are many, many suttas which speak about the three bad destinations. And so we should accept the Preta realm was originally a part of the original teaching. Okay, and so now we come to the second part of the sutta, which is concerned with the wise man, or the wise person. As says in Pali, the word is Pandita, a word that's been absorbed into English when they speak about the Pandit. But now the word Pandit has acquired a kind of derogatory connotation, like when they speak about like the so-called experts on political, on foreign policy or domestic policy, especially when they make mistakes. Then they say, well, the pundits were predicting such and such, but it's turned out to be quite contrary to their predictions. But originally the word that's been absorbed into English as pundit is the same in Pali and Sanskrit. The word is Pandita, which means a learned person, a wise person, a knowledgeable person. And in Buddhism, the Pandita is determined not simply by knowledge of factual matters, in fact, not at all by knowledge of factual matters, but rather applied wisdom in action. And so the Buddha, now I'm on page 1022 of the Sutta, section number 27. The Buddha says that there are three characteristics of a wise person, signs of a wise person, attributes of a wise person. So what are the three? Here, the wise person is one who thinks good thoughts, speaks good words, and does good deeds. And so if one wants to know who is a wise person, one has to judge not on the basis of what a person says about himself, not on the matter of his book knowledge, his scholarship, but on the matter of his behavior. Okay, so then the Buddha is going now to explain the benefits that accrue to the wise person. And so the Buddha says that the wise person experiences pleasure and joy here and now in three ways. Okay, so then the text continues. If a wise person is seated in an assembly or along a street or in a square, and people there are discussing certain pertinent and relevant matters, that is, I guess these would be matters relevant to moral conduct, or matters relevant to what makes somebody a wise person, then if the wise person is one who abstains from killing, from stealing, from sexual misconduct, from false speech, from the use of intoxicants, then he thinks, these people are discussing certain pertinent and relevant matters. These things are not found in me. That is, these unwholesome types of behavior, and I am not seen engaging in them. Okay, so this is the first kind of pleasure and joy that a wise person experiences here and now. So this would be, we call this the happiness of having a good reputation, or the happiness of being praised and admired by others. So even though in this case the people are not speaking directly about the wise person, but when speaking, one can assume that they're speaking about what are the general characteristics of a good person, and then they'll be mentioning abstaining from these unwholesome actions. And so if a person is one who abstains from these things, then he'll experience pleasure and joy knowing that he follows those lines of conduct. unfortunately today it's not the person of good behavior who gets all of the publicity and praise and admiration, but it's when somebody becomes a billionaire or somebody a musician, popular singer, sells a million records, or a sports star breaks some record, or a movie actor wins, what do they call this, the Academy Award. So those are the ones who who get the honor and praise and admiration. Okay, so this is the first type of happiness the wise person experiences, which is visible here and now. The second one, this in a sense, it just repeats what we had in the previous section. So when a robber is caught, a wise man sees or hears about kings having many kinds of torture inflicted on him. And this was the common practice in India. People sometimes complain today about the conditions of prison life. They're just so degrading, so miserable, that you're locked up in a cell and you have to spend years there, and you just have no facilities and food. Actually, the food, I think, in prison, it's said to be, I don't have experience, but probably it's regulated by law, so it has to be of a certain nutrition. No? My own one attempt ended in failure. This was in January 2013. I went down to Washington, D.C. There's an organization called IMAC, Interfaith Moral Action on Climate, and they were having a big gathering with a demonstration in front of the White House. But this was it was on Martin Luther King's birthday, his actual birthday, not the holiday. So January 15th, 2013. And the idea was to perform an act after the gathering, to have a few ministers, priests, and so on perform an act of civil disobedience in order to get arrested, in order to call attention to the climate crisis. And this was to be like a week before the second inauguration ceremony of President Obama. And so the streets, the road outside the White House, they had already set up the benches and the decorations. But first we had the gathering with, little speeches, which was all sort of within the scope of the law. But then a few of us went up to block the gate leading into the White House, including myself, thinking to get arrested. But the police kept on looking at us. And we were wondering, what's going on here? And then they politely suggested, why don't you go in front of... No, I think somebody said that we won't get arrested here. Edwin was there with me. Yeah, that's right. Edwin was there with me. They moved us over to another gate, thinking we'd get arrested there. But the police, it seems, they might have had instructions, no trouble, just 1 week before the inauguration. We don't want to get like any, demonstrators against, carbon emissions were arrested outside the White House, and President Obama just stood by and didn't say anything about them, then all of the environmental organizations will be complaining and petitioning. And so they must have had orders, don't touch them. So I heard the ghost of my mother speaking over my shoulder. Can't you do anything right? Everything you're doing, you make a mess. You can't even get arrested. Anyway, so I didn't have the opportunity to try out the food in the prison. Okay, so, today's standards in the prison, though they could certainly use improvements in many respects, but in ancient India, you don't try to get arrested in any way whatsoever, because you're going to be, seriously, you read the list of these punishments are very, very severe. You get the nose cut off, hands cut off, feet cut off, ears cut off, and then you get you can be subject to a whole series of tortures which are so brutal that they don't even call them by their true names, but they just use polite designations for them. Okay, so the wise person who's not engaging in these unwholesome actions then can have pleasure and joy thinking that I'm not being subjected to these tortures. Okay, the third type of happiness that the wise person experiences is what takes place, apparently this is shortly before death. As death, the time of death is coming on, or maybe when one is in some terminal illness and one feels that one is coming to the end, then either voluntarily or maybe just spontaneously, one's past conduct recurs to the mind. And so if one, as we saw in the previous section, if one has done a lot of unwholesome deeds, then those will recur to the mind, and they'll weigh down on the mind heavily, sort of this reminder of one's past misconduct. And it'll all make one feel miserable and frightened at the prospect for what lies ahead. But in the case of the good person, then the text says his good bodily, verbal, and mental conduct cover him, spread over him, and envelop him. This is just as the shadow of a great mountain peak in the evening covers and spreads over the earth. And so the good deeds spread over the wise man, and he thinks, I have not done what is evil, what is cruel, what is wicked, but I have done what is good, what is wholesome, and I've made myself a shelter from anguish. When I pass away, I won't go to the destination who have done what is evil. And then he does not sorrow, grieve, and lament. He does not weep, beat his breast, and become distraught. Okay, so this is the third kind of happiness that the wise person experiences here and now. And then the fourth benefit that comes to the wise person is that on the dissolution of the body after death, he is reborn in a happy destination, even in heaven. We have to note that this sutta is not concerned with the path leading to liberation, to Nibbana. But sometimes the Buddha explains, because the Buddha is regarded as the person who knows the paths leading to all destinations. And so the Buddha knows the pathways leading to the unwholesome, to rebirth in the realm of misery, the bad destinations, And also he knows the pathways leading to rebirth in the good destinations, as well as the path to liberation from all destinations, to nirvana. And so the Buddha will teach according to the proclivities, interests, potentials of the audience, and to guide people who are not yet on the path to liberation. The Buddha has to make the clear distinction, clear demarcation between the paths leading to the bad destinations and the paths leading to the good destinations. Okay, and so when we speak about rebirth in these different destinations, like last class we had this detailed description of the hell realms, and now we're going to have some description, or at least reference to the bliss and pleasure of the heavenly realms. Many of the modern people who are reading Buddhist texts say, well, there are several attitudes they can take. Either, okay, the Buddha had just been acculturated to the thought modes of ancient India, and so he accepted them as a matter of course. And since we're now living in the scientific age, we know that these realms are not real. And so the Buddha was just, he couldn't escape the limits of his worldview. And so he taught these because this was just part of the Indian cultural heritage in which he was nurtured and which he accepted as a matter of course. Another strategy that's sometimes used is, or a way to explain these texts is, of course, as the enlightened one, the Buddha knew that there were no such realms as this. But for ordinary people, to get ordinary people to behave morally, he would teach them that if you do bad deeds, you'll go to a bad rebirth. If you do good deeds, you'll have a higher rebirth. But this was just, in this interpretation, a skillful means that the Buddha was using to help people behave morally. Okay, and then a third strategy, or way to explain away these texts, is to say that the rebirth in other realms, that this is really just a metaphorical way of speaking about changing states of mind. So that if you get reborn in hell, that means that you're just feeling, really miserable, really dejected, miserable, depressed, upset, anxious, and so forth. If you're driven by, so that is the rebirth in hell, if you're just driven blindly by lust, by greed, that is what's meant by being reborn in the animal realm. And if you're really good and you experience blissful, pleasant states of mind through your goodness, that is being reborn in heaven. So that is we call the metaphorical interpretation of these realms. No, I'm not saying this. No, these are three ways in which we call them Buddhist modernists will explain these types of passages. I'm a simple, unsophisticated country boy from Brooklyn. My education didn't extend further than a PhD in Western philosophy. So I interpret them literally. Maybe some people are thinking, how could that stupid guy interpret them in that way? Clearly there can't be any, we're living in the scientific age. Okay, he studied Western philosophy, no wonder, that's really like living in an ivory tower. But some of us, we have, degrees in computer science, physics, but we're out there in the business world. We know that there's no such thing as these other realms. But back, I hope I don't bore some of you who have been coming to this class for a time by repeating something that occurred to me back in the mid-1990s when I was living in Kandy, Sri Lanka. I had a shortwave radio, and this was my way of finding out. Those days we didn't have internet, at least not in Udawatakeli, the forest in Kandy where I was living. And so my way to find out what was going on in the world was to use the shortwave radio to listen to the BBC World Service. So one day I put on the radio. It's a multi-band radio with AM, FM, and 2 shortwave bands. And I put the band to the place where I usually get the BBC World Service. And I was just getting a local Sri Lankan station. Then I kept on moving the band back and forth, trying to get the World Service. Nothing was coming through except, the Sri Lankan, regular Sri Lankan radio stations. Then suddenly I realized, I took a look closely at what had happened to the band, and somehow through carelessness, or maybe when moving the radio, I had knocked the band, the switch that determines the band, from the shortwave band to the AM band. And so when I was going back and forth along the AM band, couldn't get BBC World Service. Now if I was a sophisticated with a knowledge of computer science or physics or capable businessman, I would have been saying, there's no such thing as the BBC World Service. Just a myth that some people are making up. But as long as I'm moving the radio, the dial back and forth on the AM band, I'll never pick up the BBC World Service, because the World Service is operating on a different frequency band. So that struck me as an analogy for the way other realms of existence exist in relation to our realm of existence. We are on a particular frequency band, so to speak, so we can pick up everything that, well, not quite everything because the universe is very big, but we could pick up things that are occurring on this frequency. So we can use telescopes to explore the solar system, to explore the Milky Way, even to explore other galaxies, even to the distant boundaries of this universe. But we'll never see heavenly realms or hell realms because they are functioning on different so-called different frequency levels, different bands. But if one develops the abhinya, that's the super knowledges, then one can change the frequency level of one's mind, so one can tune into these other realms of existence. And so the way I see it is that these other realms of existence, sometimes we think of them in the popular imagination, oh, the heavens are up there, the hell realms are down there, but they are not situated geographically in relation to the human realm, or to this world in which we live, which is our collective human realm, but rather they are occurring at different vibrational frequencies, so that within, at that particular band, those beings see a world in common, they can interact with one another. And so for them, their realm is real. And in the case of the devas or the deities, they say that they can also see the human realm because they have superior faculties to us. But our faculties are very blunt, relatively, so we don't see the higher realms and the lower realms. unless we develop the abhinya, the super knowledges. Okay, and since the Buddha developed the super knowledges, he was able to see these realms, and so he spoke about them through his direct acquaintance with them. Okay, so now I'm continuing with passage number 32. The Buddha says, if it were to be rightly said of anything, that it is utterly wished for, desirable, utterly agreeable, it is of heaven that this could be said. So it's hard to finish describing the happiness of heaven. And then a monk asked the Buddha, well, if it's hard to describe the happiness of heaven, can you give a simile? And now the Buddha gives as a simile, he's going to show what would be taken as the highest form of mundane happiness experienced by a human being. And this is the happiness of what is called the Raja Chakravati, which means, or it would be translated, the wheel-turning monarch. Yeah, so here the wheel is something of a symbol for this particular ruler's entitlement to rule. And the Raja Chakravati is a figure who occurs in a number of Buddhist discourses as the ideal ruler. And it seems that through the concept of the Chakravati, the wheel-turning monarch, the Buddha, or the Buddhist texts, were trying to create a new model of kingship. Since at the time when the Buddha came, was teaching in the world, appeared in the world, the old Indian tribal republics were merging and being consolidated into growing monarchies. And so the expanding monarchies were swallowing up and absorbing the old tribal republics. And kings apparently were very greedy for power, they were assassinating, well, let's say men were assassinating one another in order to get the kingship, usurping the kingship even from their fathers, in some cases killing their own fathers to get the kingship. Wars were erupting between different kingdoms. And so in order to provide a different model of kingship, one not based on naked ambition and oppressive power, the Buddha established this idea of the Dhammachakki, Raja Dhammachakki, the one who rules through righteousness. Okay, and then the texts describe the qualities of the wheel-turning monarch, usually in terms of 7 treasures and 4 kinds of iddhi, here translated success. Trying to think of a better word than success for iddhi. 4 kinds of prosperity. Anyway, we'll see what they are. Okay, so now the text is going to go into a rather detailed explanation of the 7 treasures and the 4 types of success. So what are the 7 treasures? First comes the treasure of the wheel, since that is what defines this monarch as a wheel-turning monarch. Okay, so it happens that when this king, he's a noble king, when he goes on the Uposita day, that would be the full moon, probably the full moon Uposita. Yes, the 15th, so it's the full moon. He goes into the upper chamber of his palace, and then there appears to him what is called the divine wheel treasure. It's a kind of mystical wheel when his personal qualities are all matured and ripened. Then this wheel appears to him as a kind of guarantee of his right to rule. It's a kind of mystical confirmation of his authority. Okay, so when he sees this divine wheel treasure, then he thinks that sort of this is the tradition, that it's said that when the wheel treasure appears, that a king becomes the wheel-turning monarch. And so then he wonders, am I a wheel-turning monarch? And what is distinctive about the wheel-turning monarch is that he, maybe in quotation marks, he conquers the world or all of the surrounding continents, but not through force and violence and military action, but rather through the power of righteousness. So it's not that he's going to conquer them in order to exploit their riches, but he'll move into them in order to establish the reign of righteousness in those other territories. Okay, so when the wheel treasure appears to him, then he takes a water vessel and sprinkles it, which is a way of blessing it. And then he asks the wheel to revolve and to go forward. Okay, and then the wheel treasure starts turning in the eastern direction, and the wheel-turning monarch follows it. And when it goes to the eastern direction, when it comes to the continent in the east, then all of the opposing kings in the territories in the east, they all come to the wheel-turning monarch, they welcome him, and they accept him as their ruler. They say, "Come, great king, welcome, command us, advise us." And then what the wheel-turning king does is to inculcate the basic precepts of the moral life to them. I'm going to come to that. Yeah, I'll come to that, yeah. Okay, so the kings in the east, they submit to him, and then the wheel-turning monarch speaks to them, and he tells them basically to observe the 5 precepts: not to kill, not to steal, not to commit sexual misconduct, not to speak falsely, not to use intoxicants. Then here the passage is translated, "You should eat what you are accustomed to eat." I think maybe that's too literal, because the word bujasu could also mean enjoy what you have previously enjoyed. So I think the sense here, what's implied, is that he's not trying to impose his authority over the other kings and to extract their wealth and resources and convey them back to his own kingdom. But he's saying, I'm not going to take anything of yours, you just continue to enjoy your accustomed wealth. Okay, then the same thing happens in each of the other directions. And so in the Indian picture of the Indian geography, Jambudvipa is the continent in the middle of the world. Then there are continents to the east, south, west, and north. And the wheel-turning monarch moves into each of these surrounding continents and then establishes you could say, a reign of righteousness based on morality. And now what's also important about the wheel-turning monarch is that there's a close affinity between the wheel-turning monarch in the secular domain, the mundane domain, and the Buddha in the spiritual domain. So just as the Buddha is called Dhammaraja, the king of the Dharma, in the broadest sense, since he is the one who has mastered the entire liberating Dhamma. And so the wheel-turning monarch is also called Dhammaraja, the king of Dhamma, in the mundane sense, that he is the king who exemplifies, who embodies the Dhamma of ethical righteousness. And the connection between the two is so close that the Buddha himself, it's said in some suttas, in his previous lives, many times he had become a wheel-turning monarch. So this was one of the main channels through which he fulfilled the paramitas in order to achieve Buddhahood. And then in his last existence, when the Buddha was right after his birth, when he was just an infant, then when the court Brahmins were called in to examine the bodily features of the baby and predict his future destiny, most of them said that this child has two possible destinies. Either he becomes, if he remains at home, he becomes a wheel-turning monarch. If he goes forth into the homeless life, he becomes a fully enlightened Buddha. Okay, so the wheel-turning monarch then conquers peacefully all of the other continents, and then he returns to his own palace, and then the wheel comes along. He actually follows the wheel, and then when he takes his seat, the wheel remains by his throne, and it will remain there as long as he fulfills the duties of a wheel-turning monarch. But if he fails in his duties, then the wheel that appeared magically or mystically will, by the same token, disappear. And if the king is to regain the wheel, to regain his authority to rule, he has to make amends for his failure. He has to rectify his failures and fulfill the duties that he had neglected. Okay, we'll pass a bit quickly through the remaining 6 treasures of the wheel-turning monarch. Next comes the elephant treasure, which is an elephant that has various supernormal powers, so that if the king wants to travel someplace, he mounts the elephant in the morning, and then early in the morning, and the elephant will travel over the whole earth, even to the edge of the ocean, and it will return to the royal capital in time for the king to take his breakfast. Even United Airlines hasn't matched that yet. Can there be any kind of... Let's take the horse treasure. Okay, the horse treasure also is this horse with supernormal powers, and the king can mount the horse, and again, riding the horse, he could cross over the whole earth and then return to the royal palace in time to take his breakfast. Is there any kind of special significance, moral or spiritual significance in the elephant treasure or the horse treasure? Of the meditative nimitta. It's not taken in that way. Mm. I think it's not so much a matter of auspiciousness, but a king would always have elephants because they need elephants first to do work, and then when the king goes out riding, he'll go on an elephant. Maybe he uses both, but the typical picture is that, of course, the elephant is highest, so the king has to be on top of everybody else, so he'll go on the elephant. Any special significance? It's the same word. I'm not sure, though. I think because, let's say, the Buddha has taken that word taming from the context of taming an animal and then applied it to the mind. So what one does with the mind is to tame the mind rather than going in the other direction. Yeah. Any other ideas? Okay, anyway, something to think about. I don't have, I'm not testing you. I don't have any opinion about this myself or any interpretation. Okay, then comes the jewel treasure. So this is supposed to be, again, it's a special prerogative of the wheel-turning monarch to have this jewel, which is supposed to be its light is supposed to be so brilliant that when it's taken outside at night, its light illuminates the whole town or city, and everybody thinks the sun has arisen and it's time to go out and start working. Okay, then comes the woman treasure, who has all of the features of beauty according to the ancient Indian model. Even such that in cool weather her limbs are warm, when it's the hot weather her limbs are cool. From her body comes the scent of sandalwood, assuming that she's not putting any kind of perfume on. From her mouth, the scent of lotuses. And of course, she's always eager to serve the wheel-turning monarch in action and in speech. And I don't think this will go over well today, but she rises before the wheel-turning monarch and retires after him, since she gets up early to start, overseeing the household, make sure all the servants are preparing the breakfast, or the kitchen staff is preparing the breakfast. At night, she makes sure everything is neat and tidy before she goes to sleep. Okay, then comes what is called the steward treasure. Or maybe today we would call this in America, the Secretary of the Treasury, or in Britain, Exchequer, of other countries, the Minister of Finance. And so he's the one who takes care of all of the financial affairs of the king. And he's able to find hidden treasures, buried treasures anywhere. It seems he has the divine eye, so he could see where there are treasures buried beneath the earth or in the waters. And then comes what's called the seventh is the counselor treasure. This would be the equivalent of, it would be like a country that has a ceremonial president, but the affairs of government are in hands of the prime minister, or maybe in the United States, it doesn't work with the American political system. But this is, well, maybe it's like the National Security Advisor. But anyway, he takes over all of the affairs of governance as the king. He says, "You remain at ease, I shall govern." And apparently he's trustworthy enough so that the king doesn't have to have his wires tapped in order to find out, to ensure himself that the council, the treasurer, is not plotting an overthrow of the state. It seems, I have to say, it makes things a bit boring for the wheel-turning monarch. What? I wonder what he does, I think the idea is not that the people give these things to him, but these things occur to him through a kind of mystical power or spiritual power. That these are accessories that are intrinsic to the idea of the wheel-turning monarch. So when somebody has all of the qualifications, the wheel treasure just appears out of thin air, and the special elephant, the special horse appear out of thin air. Yeah, he's not doing anything by force. Okay, anyway, let us go on. Okay, so these are the 7 treasures. Then we have what's called the 4 kinds of success. Though I'm not sure that success is such a good word. We'll see what they are, and we'll see if we can come up with a better word. Okay, one is that the wheel-turning monarch is handsome, comely, and graceful, and he possesses the supreme beauty of complexion. So because he comes into the position of wheel-turning monarch, this is the fruit, supposed to be the fruit of vast accumulations of wholesome karma and good aspirations. It would be like the beneficent aspiration to promote the mundane welfare and happiness of many people. And presumably in many past lives, to become a wheel-turning monarch, he has held other positions of responsibility in which he's done a lot of benefits for people. And he's also developed the mind of loving kindness towards people. And so as the product or fruit of his good actions and his loving mind, he acquires a physical form which is endowed with great beauty in all respects. Okay, another sort of karmic result of his good deeds in the past, the same karma that brings him into the position of wheel-turning monarch, also ensures that he has a long lifespan and surpasses other human beings in that respect. And so he'll live to be, it depends on the lifespan of that period, but maybe if he were living today, he would live to be in the 90s or even 100 years of age. Okay, and then as a third karmic result, or result of his good karma in the past, the wheel-turning monarch is always healthy and vigorous. And so the stock description of good health is that he's free from illness and affliction. He has a good digestion, neither too cool nor too warm. And he surpasses other human beings in that respect. Okay, and then the fourth success of the wheel-turning monarch is probably based on his present policies, not just on past karma. And this is that he's beloved to everybody in his realm. So he's dear and agreeable to Brahmins and householders, just the way a loving father would be dear and agreeable to his own children. And then the incident is mentioned that once the wheel-turning monarch went out for a drive to his pleasure garden with his army, and then as he was driving by, all of the people were probably lining the streets in order to see him. It was like a grand procession. And so as he was driving by, all of the citizens said to him, "Drive more slowly so that we may see you longer." You know, in these days, it wasn't like you're sitting in front of a television set where the camera is following the procession, but you're standing there maybe waiting for a couple of hours for the procession to come by, for the king to come by. And if he comes by quickly, you know, then in just a minute, he's out of sight again. And so you're didn't really get a chance to get a good look at him. So the people ask him, "Go more slowly so we may see you longer." And he, the king, asks his driver, "Drive more slowly so that I might see the people longer." So this is the four kinds of success. Better word? Anybody come up with a better word? The qualities is general, maybe too general. Not all are a reward. I think the Pali word is iddhi, which often in other contexts it means supernormal powers. Again? Bestowment. Maybe. Okay, anyway, let us go on. Okay, so now the Buddha is asking the monks, he says, so this is, all of this description of the wheel-turning monarch is to illustrate the kind of happiness that a human being can experience, a human being in the greatest position of felicity. Maybe that's the good word. It's a rather rare word used. It's not a word not used so often today, felicity. Like happiness or bliss. So the Buddha says, would a wheel-turning monarch experience pleasure and joy because of possessing these 7 treasures and 4 kinds of felicity? And the monks say, yes, he would. Then the Buddha picks up a stone and says, what do you think, which is larger? The stone in my hand, or the Himalayas, the king of mountains? And then the monks say that the stone is very small, whereas the Himalayas are much larger. And so then the Buddha says, in the same way, the happiness that the wheel-turning monarch experiences is very slight, just like the stone in my hand. It doesn't compare to the happiness of heaven. It's not even a fraction. Okay, but then the Buddha continues, if sometime or other, after a long time, the wise man passes away from heaven and comes back to the human state, then he is reborn into a high family. That's a family of nobles or of prosperous nobles or Brahmins or householders, one that's rich with great positions and so on. and he's handsome and graceful. He obtains all of the necessities easily, food and drink, clothes, vehicles, garlands, scents, and unguents. And then he behaves well in body, speech, and mind. And as a result, with the breakup of the body, after death, again he's reborn in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. And so this is like, again, the Buddha uses a simile, it's like a gambler who, with his first throw of the dice, he gets a very lucky throw and takes in a lot of wealth with his throw. So it's a far more lucky throw when a wise person who conducts himself well in body, speech, and mind, after death is reborn in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. So that is the complete perfection of the stage of the wise person. Okay, and that is the sutta on the fool and the wise person. So any points for discussion or any questions? What do you think of this sutta? Seem like ancient Indian mythology, legend, fiction? Barbara? Wait, Jen is going to give you the microphone.
Can you hear me? The unlucky throw is suggesting that it's not a usual progression. It's like you do all of these things and then it's luck if you're reborn in heaven.
No. I don't think he's saying that it's luck. It's just, he's just using an expression, taking an image or a simile from everyday life that is the lucky throw at dice, and then saying that he's just using that expression, a lucky throw, to indicate that the rebirth in the heavenly world is luckier than that lucky throw at dice. But he's not saying that one is reborn in the heavenly world just through luck.
Okay.
Yeah, Sam.
From the piece in the Anguttara Nikaya, it's the last line was, and that rule cannot be overthrown by any hostile being. Is that in reference that once the Dhamma is established, there is...
We'll come to those passages. First, I want to finish with this sutta.
Okay.
So if there's anything coming out of this sutta, okay, please in the back, and wait till the microphone comes to you.
I was expecting at the end of this sutra that you would say, or that the sutra would say, that the happiness of liberation does not still come, that the Himalaya would be the happiness of liberation, and that even the Raja Chakravarti would not be the same. But why doesn't that sutra not, because in most of the sutras there's an end where the sutra comes to that climax that says nothing is as happy as liberation. Why did this sutra stop short?
It's a good question. Because the Buddha is speaking to monks, and usually when he's speaking to monks, even if he speaks about superior types of worldly pleasure, then he'll, in order to sort of spur them on in their Dhamma practice, he'll hold up the happiness of liberation as superior to the highest type of worldly happiness. Maybe, even though the Buddha is speaking to monks, maybe he's not intending the discourse to remain with the monks. Maybe he has in mind that it's intended for people who are still at lower stages of spiritual development. That's the only explanation I can give. Wait.
Sorry. Didn't you also say that the sutta is not concerned with the path leading to liberation?
Yeah.
So maybe
that's what I
that's why.
said. Yeah. But in effect, she's asking, why doesn't the Buddha bring in liberation? Why doesn't it at least make some mention? And it's a good question. If the Buddha was addressing, say, a crowd of village people who had come to see him, then one could see why he's not mentioning liberation. But the audience of the sutta are monks. Yeah, so I don't have a definite explanation. But the point is certainly true that when the Buddha, I'm trying to think of a sutta offhand where the Buddha...
It sounds like this is one of the pebbles or layers of happiness, that there's so many different levels of happiness, that this is one of the stones to that path. And that, I don't know how the book is designed, but that's one of the teachings that will lead you to that path, and all many paths to liberation. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but...
Well, certainly, you know, the sort of the, let us say, the injunction or the message that emerges out of the sutta is avoid unwholesome conduct in body, speech, and mind, and cultivate good conduct of body, speech, and mind. And so, avoiding unwholesome conduct and cultivating good conduct, those are two prerequisites for following the path to liberation. But the sutta stops with the good conduct of body, speech, and mind, and it doesn't go beyond and to expound what is necessary to gain liberation. Maybe that's the reason, because if the Buddha were to bring in the happiness of liberation, then the question would arise, how does one gain the happiness of liberation? Then he has to give a still more elaborate explanation, and the sutta becomes still longer. Edwin.
Well, he only speaks about heaven, so therefore he never went to nirvana, so therefore he would not go into enlightenment. What would he go into? He's just talking about the human and heavens. Therefore, all this situation you're experiencing will bring you only up to heaven realm, not further than that.
Yeah.
The sutta explains it. I mean, it's just heavens. Doesn't go further than that.
No, it doesn't go, it doesn't bring
Exactly.
in-
So why would he talk about enlightenment when he's not really there yet? He's just talking about one realm, which is the next one is heavens.
Yeah.
No? I mean,
I'm not quite sure that I get
no,
that.
what I'm saying is that he only goes up to heaven's realm.
Yeah.
So there's no other realm. So why would he speak of any other topic of enlightenment? Because he's not going further. He's only teaching up to that level.
Yeah.
I mean, go.
Would this be the equivalent of the stream enterer, maybe?
No.
It's not even.
No, not at all. Because there's no mention of any of the practices that lead to stream entry. It's purely what we might call, I think in the previous class I mentioned the three kinds of benefits that the Dhamma can lead to: well-being and happiness here and now, in this life, in the mundane sense, the good fortune or the happiness of a fortunate rebirth, and the ultimate goal, the ultimate benefit, which is nibbana, or liberation. And this sutta is just concerned with avoiding harm and misery here and now, obtaining the benefits visible in the present life, and a happy rebirth. Any other urgent point? Okay, then there was the handout that I sent electronically. This gives a little more on the wheel-turning monarch. So it helps us to see a little bit of this kind of political ideal that the Buddha sketched. So there's a sutta that comes in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha is speaking to the monks, and he says that even a wheel-turning monarch, he calls him the just and righteous king. I think that the Pali is Dhamma Raja Dhammiko, using the word Dhamma twice, does not govern his realm without a co-ruler. Strike out the T there. Okay, then a monk asked the Buddha, who is the co-ruler of the wheel-turning monarch? And then the Buddha says, it is the Dhamma, O monk. And here the Buddha, when he uses the word Dhamma, he's not referring to his own teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the dependent origination, and so on, the Noble Eightfold Path. Because the wheel-turning monarch also arises in times when the Buddha Dharma doesn't exist in the world. So the Buddha appears very rarely, but wheel-turning monarchs, according to the Buddha's text, can appear at times when no Buddha is existing. So here the word Dhamma has a different connotation than the word Dhamma indicates something different than the Buddha's teaching in the narrow sense, but rather it refers to, we might call it the principle, the law of righteousness, goodness, and truth, which is ever existing. It would be the law of that unwholesome deeds bring suffering and misery, the law that good deeds bring well-being and happiness, the law that one should protect the lives and well-being of others and avoid any kind of harm and suffering for others. And so, the way the Buddha elaborates, he says that the wheel-turning monarch, the just and righteous king, relying on the Dhamma, honoring the Dhamma, esteeming and respecting it with the Dhamma as his standard, banner, and sovereign, provides lawful, this is dhammika, protection, shelter, and safety for his own dependents, for the kshatriyas, that's the aristocrats in his realm, for his army, for the Brahmins and householders, for the inhabitants of the towns and countryside, for ascetics and Brahmins, even for the birds and the beasts. So he protects even the animal life within the realm. And then the wheel-turning monarch, who thus provides lawful protection, shelter for all, is one who rules by Dhamma only, in accordance with the Dhamma. So the wheel-turning monarch can't rule arbitrarily according to his own will or according to his own desires, but he has to look to a higher standard in order to rule legitimately. And that higher standard is, you might call this the eternal, natural moral law of the universe. And when he's ruling in accordance with the Dhamma, the Buddha says, that rule cannot be overthrown by any hostile human being. And so the wheel-turning monarch, when he's following the principles of the wheel-turning monarch, then nobody can rebel against him, no outside country can conquer him, no usurper can, no ambitious member of his court can assassinate him and usurp his throne, but his rule is guaranteed through, I guess, through the power of the Dhamma. And then there's another passage on the wheel-turning monarch. It's actually is much longer. It occurs in the Digha Nikaya. This is called the Chakravati Sihanada Sutta, the lion's roar on the wheel-turning monarch. And this sutta takes place supposedly in a very early, in the far distant past, when the lifespan of human beings was much longer than it is now, according to the Buddhist texts. So there's a king named Dalha Nemi who said to a certain man, "My good man, whenever you see that the sacred wheel treasure has slipped from its position, report it to me." And I think it slips from its position as a way of indicating to a reigning wheel-turning king that it's time for him to step down from his rule. The ancient tradition for the ancient tradition for the wheel-turning kings is when they reach late middle age, early old age, when their hair starts to turn gray, that they then pass on their rule to their son, and they retire and go into the forest to live as an ascetic. And so when this king Dalha Nemi is growing old, then at a certain point the wheel-turning monarch, the wheel treasure vanishes, and that's a signal to him that it's time to step down. So the treasurer, or the man, reports this to the king, and then the king sends for his eldest son and says to him that the wheel treasure has now slipped from its position. I have heard it said that when this happens, the wheel-turning monarch doesn't have much longer to live. And so he says, "I have had my fill of human pleasures. Now is the time to seek heavenly pleasures. You should take over the land. I will shave off my hair and my beard, put on the ochre robes, and go forth into the homeless life." Okay, so then he installs his son in the position of the king, and the king himself renounces the throne and becomes an ascetic. And then after the king goes forth, then the wheel treasure vanishes. And so now we have a new king, but the mark of legitimacy, the mark of his authority has vanished. He gets to be a king in succession to his father, but he doesn't automatically get to be the wheel-turning king. And so when this is reported to the new king, he feels sad, and then he goes to his father, who's now called the Rajisi, the royal sage, and reports this to him. And then the former king says to him, "You shouldn't feel sad about this, because the whale treasure is not automatically part of the package. You have to earn the whale treasure. You have to fulfill the qualifications to become the wheel-turning monarch." And so this means that to get the whale treasure, for the whale treasure to return, you have to fulfill the duties of a noble wheel-turning monarch. And then when you're doing so, then on the Uposita day, the full moon day, then at a certain time, the sacred wheel treasure will reappear to you with its 1,000 spokes and so forth. Okay, now the new king asks his father, what is the duty of the wheel-turning monarch? And the king replies, or the sage king replies, that depending upon the Dhamma, again it's the same words as in the other sutta, based on the Dhamma, depending on the Dhamma, with the Dhamma as your standard, you should establish righteous guard, ward and protection for your own household, your troops, the Kshatriyas, the Brahmins and householders, the town and country folk, ascetics and Brahmins, beasts and birds. But then comes something else that's important. Let no crime prevail in your kingdom, and to those who are in need give wealth. That is, he has to ensure that there's no poverty in the realm. And then, when there are ascetics and Brahmins in your kingdom leading the life of renunciation, from time to time you should approach them and ask, Venerable Sirs, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, blameworthy and blameless, what is to be followed and what is to be avoided, what leads to harm and suffering, and what leads to welfare and happiness. Then when you receive their advice, then you should avoid what is unwholesome and do what is wholesome. Okay, and then this new king receives the advice and then he fulfills it. But what happens, according to the sutta, as time goes on and the throne passes from one wheel-turning monarch to another, or from one king to another, then eventually there comes a king who doesn't provide wealth to his citizens. As a result, poverty breaks out in his realm. And then when poverty breaks out, then in succession crime starts to spread. Then the king has to impose capital and punishment on the criminals. And then gradually there takes place a kind of moral degeneration in the realm until the whole realm gets plunged into chaos. So maybe now we're getting pretty close to the time to stop. Any questions on this passage? Yeah, I was thinking if there's anything that requires some discussion, then we'll take up the discussion after lunch. Okay, so let us end by sharing the merits. Sharing the merits to the devas, the nagas or dragon spirits, the bhutas, the fair spirits, and all other beings. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang be bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang ta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadaya avichihetato etantare satakai upapana rupi arupi cha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Okay, then